Welcome to this exploration of one of the most disturbing cases in Kentucky history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. What locations and times of day or night these recorded stories reach are of interest to us. In 1903, Harlan County, Kentucky, had experienced an unusually severe fall. Nestled amid undulating hills that seemed to smother sound itself was the mining community of Cumberland Gap. Outsiders saw it as simply another faded, dusty, and impoverished mining town. Locals, however, were more aware. They were aware that the Hollow brothers had previously resided in the hollow behind Raven Rock, which is still off-limits to hunters after sundown. According to 1,903 county records, Thomas and Elijah Hollow, members of the Hollow family, were reported missing in November of that year. The probe was abruptly halted after exactly 3 weeks. There were never any bodies discovered. Suspects were never identified. County officials closed up the brothers' little cabin on the outskirts of Black Mountain Hollow and let it decay. However, the reason the search parties declined to continue their investigation after the first week is something that is purposefully left out of those official documents. Why the sheriff's final report has a distinctly unsteady handwriting style. Why the town as a whole agreed to never mention the Hollow brothers again. Though some things refused to be forgotten, it seemed like everyone had decided in silence to do so. The Hollow brothers came to town around 1897 amid the coal boom that changed southern Kentucky, according to the Cumberland Gap Register. Despite being 5 years apart in age, they were both tall, thin men with the same looks. Elijah, 31, seldom ever spoke more than a few words to anyone, while Thomas, 36, the elder, spoke for both of them. They bought a little piece of land out of town, constructed a simple cabin themselves, and mostly kept to themselves. Curious information concerning their acquisition can be found in the deed of purchase, which was found in county archives during a 1962 records digitizing operation. The Blackwood family had owned the land they selected, but they had given it up after 3 of their sons were killed in a mining accident in 1889. For years, the property had been unclaimed since it was thought to be worthless because it was far from the town and next to what the locals nicknamed the Bad Hollow, a tiny ravine where fog pervaded all year round. For a small price, the Hollow brothers paid with newly struck coins that the cashier observed were cold to the touch, as if stored underground. They arrived at a time when Cumberland Gap was rapidly growing. Industrial-scale coal mining and an influx of laborers from all across the Appalachian region were brought about by the Louisville and Nashville Railroad's extended lines into the area. From 1,895 to 1,900, the town's population tripled. The Hollow brothers ought to have been inconspicuous in this tangle of unfamiliar faces and possibilities, but they stood out from the start for some reason. A ledger from Walsh's General Store, dated September 1897. New men T&E Hollow purchased supplies today. Unusual selections, 40 pounds of salt, no food items requested. Old maps of the region, specifically inquiring about cave systems. E. Hollow stood watching the street the entire time, while T. conducted business. Neither removed their hats. Working the night jobs that most men shunned, the brothers were employed at the Blue Diamond Mine. Jacob Whitley, their foreman, wrote in his employment ledger that they were exceptional workers, tireless but unsettling to other men. Request they continue on night rotation. The brothers saved almost every penny they earned, never missed a day, and never voiced any complaints about the hazardous working conditions. More direct observations can be found in Whitley's personal journal, which was found in 1965 during his grandson's estate sale. The Hollowmen work like no miners I've seen. They require minimal light, move through the narrowest tunnels with ease, and seem to sense where the coal seams run before we open them. The other men won't work alongside them anymore. Claim their picks strike the rock in perfect unison, no matter how far apart they work, like they share one mind between 2 bodies. Their case is especially peculiar because they don't seem to be very active outside of their work. Despite religion playing a major role in community life, they are not mentioned in any church records. No general store receipts other than the bare necessities. According to Samuel Burke, the town photographer, The brothers adamantly objected to being included in any group photos of the mine workers. A fuzzy background figure in a town gathering in 1899, with a tall, thin shadow standing at the very edge of the picture with its face turned away from the camera, is the sole known image of either brother. Imaging experts from the University of Kentucky examined this photographic oddity in 1967. Their analysis states, the figure appears unusually elongated, approximately 15 to 20% taller than surrounding individuals. More notable is the unusual light absorption around the figure. The shadow cast appears to bend in physically impossible ways, and the grain of the photograph is disrupted in a pattern consistent with extreme temperature exposure, though only in that specific area. According to all accounts, the Hollow brothers were industrious, quiet men who ought to have been forgotten. According to 1,898 land survey maps, the brothers' cabin was situated at the intersection of three natural formations: a limestone ridge to the north, an underground stream that briefly surfaced before disappearing into the mountainside, and a natural depression that locals called the Witch's Cauldron. Because of the way fog gathered there in perfect circular patterns, the location violated several Appalachian folk taboos regarding home placement. They became the center of what old-timers would later refer to as the silence that saved Cumberland Gap. It sat where three shadows meet at noon, was hidden from view from the main road, and had no designated route, just a meandering footpath that appeared to double back on itself. In her household almanac, Martha Jenkins, a local herbalist and midwife, recorded local superstitions. A December 1897 entry states, "The newcomers have built where no home should stand. The Blackwood place has been avoided for reasons the older families remember. The ground there doesn't hold prints. Seeds planted return nothing but pale, twisted sprouts. The brothers either don't know or don't care about such things." The brothers settled into a rhythm in Cumberland Gap very quickly. They spent their remaining time at their isolated cabin, worked their night shifts, and went to town once a week to get supplies. Thomas occasionally went to the county records office to look up old mining surveys and land claims. In a letter to her cousin, the clerk, Josephine Miller, wrote that he asked for the oldest maps that were accessible and made detailed notes on the 1782nd initial survey of the area, paying special attention to regions designated as unexplored or hazardous terrain. This tranquil life was maintained by the Hollow brothers for almost 6 years. When Thomas asked for permission to drill a well on their land in 1899, it was their only significant encounter with the town's officials. The applicant insists on excavation exceeding 60 feet, far beyond water table requirements. When questioned, stated additional depth needed for temperature regulation. Despite geological concerns, the permit was granted due to the property's remote location, but the request was approved. Dr. William Forrester, the town's sole doctor, wrote in his record that the crisis started in August 1903. The only up-to-date description of the bizarre circumstances leading up to the brothers' disappearance may be found in his records, which were found decades later in 1965 when renovating his old office. August 17, 1903. Called to the Collins farm after young Peter Collins, age 19, was found wandering along Shawnee Trail in a state of extreme distress. The boy appears physically unharmed, but has not spoken a word since being found. His eyes track movement, and he responds to simple commands, but makes no attempt to communicate. Mrs. Collins reports he had gone hunting near Black Mountain Hollow 3 days prior. I have administered a sedative and recommended rest. A few days later, Dr. Forrester wrote, August 24, 1903. Peter Collins remains in the same condition. No physical cause can be determined. When shown a map of the area and asked to indicate where he had been hunting, he became extremely agitated, tearing the paper to pieces. Most concerning is his reaction to darkness. As the sun sets, his distress visibly increases. He must be restrained at night to prevent self-harm. Robert Collins, a well-respected farmer whose land abutted the woods encircling the hollow, had an eldest son named Peter. Family Bible records indicate that Peter and Emma Whitaker were engaged in November of that year. As a church deacon, a good hunter, and a man with a great memory, He had been a busy and respected young man. The town was confused by his unexpected illness, which also signaled the start of Cumberland Gap's worst time. Peter's condition is further clarified by an unpublished interview with Emma Whitaker, conducted by the Harlan Historical Society in 1968. The Peter that came back wasn't the same man. His eyes, they didn't focus right, like he was always looking at something just behind you. He'd flinch at shadows, and his skin was always cold to the touch, no matter how many blankets we piled on him. The doctor called it shock, but it was more than that. It was like part of him never came back from those woods. More anomalous incidents were reported during the month of September. 3 farms that bordered the hollow lost livestock. There was an odd quiet in the woods, according to hunters. No scurrying creatures, no bird music. One of the last people from that era to still live, Franklin Moore, told the Harlan Historical Society in 1968 that it wasn't natural, that silence. You'd stand in those woods and hear nothing but your own heartbeat, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. In a single night, the Millbrook farm lost 6 sheep without any indication of conflict or predation. They discovered their pen's gate neatly unlatched. According to Samuel Millbrook's September 8th diary post, they didn't run. Something led them away willingly. Sarah Thompson, 12, claimed to have seen a man made of shadows standing at the edge of her family's land, which was adjacent to the valley and surrounded the forest on September 12. Joseph Thompson, her father, wrote about the event from Louisville to his brother. Sarah's imagination has been overactive since her mother's passing, but this episode was different. She wasn't excited or seeking attention. She was terrified. Claims the figure stood watching our house for hours, and when she finally called to her older brother, it smiled with too many teeth before stepping backward into the trees. We found unusual boot prints in the soft earth, very narrow, extremely deep, as if the wearer carried impossible weight. The Hollow brothers, however, went about their daily lives as usual, working at night and keeping to themselves. However, individuals started to detect minor adjustments. Thomas, who used to converse sparingly when needed, now didn't talk to anyone. During shifts deep in the mine, Elijah started singing to himself in a low voice, reciting old folk tunes that reverberated uncannily through the tunnels. Although their foreman observed that their job was still flawless, other miners were becoming less and less willing to work close to them. Jacob Whitley's journal from the end of September includes a worrying, "The eastern shaft where the Hollow men have been working alone has yielded an unprecedented amount of coal. The company is pleased, but something doesn't add up. The volume they're extracting exceeds what should be physically possible for 2 men, even working double shifts. More concerning is the coal itself. Our buyers report it burns hotter and longer than any other from our mine, but produces a peculiar blue flame and leaves no ash, only a fine black powder that the wind won't disperse." A small earthquake rocked the area on September 28. Although it only lasted a few seconds and did not cause much damage, a number of locals noticed an odd occurrence. Every clock in the town stopped for precisely 12 minutes at the exact moment of the tremor before starting up again. Brother Simmons came to me in distress, claiming his pocket watch halted at 2:17, then suddenly jumped ahead to 2:29. I dismissed it until Mrs. Abernathy mentioned the same with her kitchen clock, and then realized my own timepiece showed the identical discrepancy. Perhaps a sign that time itself is not as fixed as we believe, reads the diary of Reverend Howard Grant, one of several personal accounts that contain this detail. Suddenly, on the 12th of October 1903, things changed. T&E Hollow failed to emerge from Shaft 7 at end of shift. Search found nothing. Reappeared at mine entrance 3 hours later, clothes soaked, despite no water in that section. T. Hollow requested 1-month leave effective immediately, granted due to exemplary work record. This incident occurred during another earthquake, this one too minor to be felt by most residents. This is an odd entry in the shift manager's log. Nonetheless, the disruption was captured by equipment at the Cumberland Gap Telegraph office. Miles Crawford, the operator, wrote in his log, Unusual seismic activity registered from direction of Black Mountain at approximately 4:13 a.m. Signal interrupted for exactly 3 minutes. When transmission resumed, experienced high-pitched tone on all lines for approximately 17 seconds. For the next 2 weeks, no one in the town saw the brothers. From a distance, smoke could still be seen rising from their cabin chimney, but they didn't have any guests or public appearances. According to Dr. Forrester's diary, October 28, 1903, Sheriff Parsons consulted me regarding Thomas Hollow, who appeared at his office today with an unusual request. He asked for official documentation that would allow the exhumation of a grave. When asked whose grave, Hollow reportedly smiled and said, "No one is buried there yet." The request was denied. Sheriff reports Hollow's demeanor was unnaturally calm, eyes unfocused as if looking at something beyond the room. In Cumberland Gap, the tension kept rising. There was still no word from Peter Collins. After getting too close to the Hollow, 3 more hunting dogs vanished. Additionally, a strange light was seen emanating from the Hollow brothers' cottage on November 2. I was checking the eastern line when I saw it, a light like nothing natural. It started at the chimney of the Hollow place and spread outward like water rippling. The trees around the cabin seemed to bend away from it. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. Most strange was the effect on my lantern. The flame froze in place, didn't flicker at all until the blue light faded. Then my lantern went out completely, though it had been freshly filled, said Martin Weber, a German immigrant who worked as a night watchman for the railroad. Unusually early for the area, the season's first frost fell on November 3. Across the region, farmers claimed that the ice formed on barn doors and windows in strange designs, all pointing in the direction of the Hollow. Perfect circles, complex spirals, and what some sources called writing in no language known to man. Thomas Hollow's last appearance in town was on November 4. He went to the telegraph office in Boston and sent a message to an unidentified receiver. This telegram's contents were never recorded because, according to operator Crawford, the paper caught fire just after it was transmitted. Crawford did, however, recall the address: Miskatonic University's Department of Anthropology, an organization that has no historical record of being, according to further research. Elijah Hollow went to Dr. Forrester's house that same day. The doctor's journal gives an in-depth description of this unforeseen incident. Elijah Hollow came to my door at dusk, the first time I have ever heard him speak without his brother present. He requested a specific medical text from my library, Harrington's Anatomical Divergences in Isolated Communities. When I asked his purpose, he smiled in a manner I can only describe as unsettling and said, "Confirmation, doctor. We need to be certain about the capacity of the human form." I denied his request, at which point he thanked me with unusual formality and left. Most troubling was his parting statement: "It matters little. We have found a better vessel." On the 5th of November 1903, everything was different. 7 miners were killed in a fire at the Blue Diamond Mine, according to the front page of the Cumberland Gap Register. A little note indicating that Thomas and Elijah Hollow were discovered gone from their house with signs of odd disturbance was buried at the bottom of page 3. The next morning, the sheriff organized a search party. The Hollow brothers had mostly worked at Shaft 7, which is where the mine fire happened. Despite the fact that no miners were scheduled in that region, company records show the fire started at precisely 3:17 a.m. The cause was never identified. Of the 12 men who entered to fight the fire and rescue potential survivors, only 5 exited, hindering rescue operations with what survivors described as unnatural blackness that swallowed their lantern light and an oppressive sensation, like enormous pressure from all sides. According to Sheriff Parsons' official report, which is located in the search party of 12 men dispatched to Hollow residents and surrounding woods, cabin found in state of extreme disarray. Furniture overturned, personal belongings scattered. Most notable was the floor of the main room. Boards had been pried up, and a hole approximately 6 feet deep had been dug into the earth below the house. Contents of hole undetermined as search was interrupted by approach of severe storm. What was discovered in that hole is not mentioned in the official report, but Dr. Forrester's journal fills in the gaps. November 6th, 1903. Sheriff Parsons arrived at my door at dusk, visibly shaken. He described finding a collection of personal effects in the pit beneath the hollow cabin, items belonging to various townspeople who had no connection to the brothers, a hairbrush belonging to Mrs. Whitaker, a child's toy from the Schmidt family, a pocket watch belonging to Judge Harmon. None of these people reported these items missing. More disturbing were the dozens of small cloth pouches containing what appeared to be soil from different locations, each meticulously labeled with names of households throughout the county. The doctor continues. Most concerning was Parsons's description of markings carved into the earth walls of the pit, symbols similar to those I've seen in certain anthropological texts discussing prehistoric cave paintings, but arranged in patterns suggesting a mathematical precision beyond primitive understanding. Parsons insisted I accompany him tomorrow to document these findings properly. I agreed, though with considerable reservation. There was no sign of the well the brothers had been allowed to dig in 1899. Rather, there was indications of tunneling in several directions, and the excavation beneath their home seemed to stretch horizontally. It was unclear where such a significant amount of earth had been moved, because the removed material had not been heaped outside as one might anticipate. The following day, the search was extended into the woods around the cabin. Locals would later refer to this as the Circle, according to a report filed by Deputy James Crawford, which was marked not for public record and sealed until 1950. About 400 yards north of the hollow cabin, we discovered a clearing not marked on any forest survey, perfectly circular, roughly 30 feet in diameter, where no vegetation grows. The soil appeared burned or scorched, though no evidence of fire was present. At the center was a crude stone altar. The items discovered upon this altar are described in Evidence Log No. 7, though I recommend these never be made public knowledge. Mr. Savan has never been located. A letter written by Deputy Crawford to his brother and discovered in family papers in 1966 offers a haunting glimpse. I cannot speak directly of what we found in that circle. I have taken an oath, as have all who were present. But I will say this. It defied natural law. Objects suspended without support. Metal melded with stone. Organic matter in states of transformation that no science can explain, and everywhere, those damnable markings, the same symbols found beneath the cabin, but larger, more elaborate. Sheriff ordered everything photographed, then destroyed on site. The photographer Burke refused to develop the plates, instead smashing them with a hammer and casting the pieces into the river. Smart man. We do know, however, that the search group declined to go back into the woods the next day. In his final report, Sheriff Parsons stated that conditions have made further search untenable, even though that week's weather was fair. Oddly enough, Peter Collins started talking again at this point. As stated by Dr. Rice Forrester, November 9th, 1903, called to Collins' farm where Peter, silent for nearly 3 months, began speaking in early hours of morning. His words are troubling and often incoherent. He repeatedly mentions the brothers who weren't brothers and what they called up from the deep place. Most concerning is his insistence that they aren't missing. They're multiplying. I have recommended he be transferred to the state hospital in Lexington for specialized care. They found a door that shouldn't be opened. Not brothers. Same man split across time. Collector and collected. They need 13 to complete the pattern. I was to be one. But they said my mind was too rigid. Wouldn't bend properly. The others will be more suitable. They sing to what waits below. It listens. It's so hungry after sleeping so long. These outbursts were written off as the result of trauma and possible brain injury, according to Dr. Forrester's notes. Inexplicably, however, during the course of the following 3 days, 7 additional Cumberland Gap residents started to show similar symptoms. Catatonia, interspersed with frantic talk about the pattern and the awakening. They all shared the trait of residing in houses where the Hollow brothers had taken soil samples. Although he was relocated, Peter Collins never showed up. On the Wilderness Road, the transport wagon was discovered abandoned. There was no sign of the patient or the driver. After a brief investigation, this case was eventually consigned to the dozens of other disappearances that afflicted the area at that time when law enforcement resources were scarce. Later, Oliver Blackburn, a conductor on the L&N Railroad, reported seeing Peter Collins get on a northbound train the same day. In his account to Sheriff Parsons, it was Collins, no doubt, but he weren't alone. Tall man in black accompanied him, face hidden by his hat. The strange thing was how they moved perfectly in step, like they were connected by invisible strings. Collins's eyes were open but empty, didn't respond when I called his name. The hunt for the Hollow brothers was formally over by November 15th. Despite the fact that their taxes were paid in full, the county seized their property for delinquent taxes. A strange town meeting was conducted at the Cumberland Gap Courthouse, and the cottage was boarded up. There are no formal minutes from this meeting. However, a personal letter from Eleanor Simmons to her sister in Louisville, dated November 16th, offers a glimpse. The meeting last night was unlike anything I've witnessed. Sheriff Parsons spoke briefly about putting recent events behind us, without ever specifying what events. Judge Harmon then proposed what he called a pact of silence for the good of the town. No vote was taken, but everyone understood. We are not to speak of the Hollow brothers again. Not to our children, not to outsiders, not even among ourselves. Most unsettling was watching Peter Collins's mother weeping silently in the back row while everyone pretended not to notice. Eleanor continues. The strangest moment came when Reverend Grant attempted to lead a prayer. As soon as he spoke the words, "Protect us from evil," every lantern in the courthouse dimmed simultaneously. Judge Harmon immediately adjourned the meeting. As we filed out, I noticed something troubling. The courthouse clock showed 8:45, but the church bell had just struck midnight. Cumberland Gap decided to forget as a group. They stopped talking about the Hollow brothers. If children inquired about the boarded-up cabin, they were silenced. When outsiders asked, they were either intentionally misled or met with blank stares. However, forgetting does not equate to resolve. Subtle changes were observed in the neighborhood in the weeks after the disappearance. An exceptionally high number of typographical errors can be found in the December 7, 1903 edition of the Cumberland Gap Register. These errors include letters that have been flipped or replaced in patterns that, when mapped across the entire paper, produce the same symbols seen in the hollow excavation. The next day, Harrison Wells, the editor of the newspaper, left without giving a reason and relocated to Cincinnati. Production records from the Blue Diamond Mine reveal an unexpected development. Unexpectedly, coal taken from Shaft 7, the scene of the fire, tested at over twice the thermal efficiency of earlier samples. Despite the resistance of the employees, the firm increased activities in that area. Before the year ended, 3 more miners vanished in that shaft. Although no remains were found, cave-ins were blamed for their disappearances. In the decades that followed, Cumberland Gap went through what the locals referred to as the bad years. Between 1904 and 1910, the mine collapsed 3 times, killing 46 people. In 1907, a TB outbreak devastated the town's population. Most oddly, census data indicates an exceptionally high number of disappearances. People who just disappeared without explanation, frequently after experiencing weird dreams, or a sense of being watched. Records of attendance at schools between 1904 and 1910 show a concerning trend. Unusual developmental characteristics were seen in children born after November 1903. According to Mary Sinclair's notes, which are found in the Cum Gap school files, the new generation seems altered somehow. They rarely speak among themselves. Their academic performance is remarkable, particularly in mathematics and sciences beyond our curriculum. Most troubling is their collective behavior. They move in unison without apparent signals, and during certain astronomical events, full moons, eclipses, they cannot be roused from deep, trance-like sleep. Nature gradually reclaimed the cabin that the Hollow brothers had left undisturbed. What was left of the ground was apparently scorched by lightning in 1921. The land was never developed or resold. However, there is no fire department record to support this. Few were aware that the region had been briefly examined as a possible new coal seam location in 1917 by a geological survey team from the Kentucky Department of Mining. The team's leader, Dr. Howard Mitchell, kept a personal field journal that reveals a different story than their official report, which simply states, "Area unsuitable for mining operations due to unstable ground conditions. Instrumentation malfunctions in proximity to the target site. Magnetic compasses spin wildly. Film exposed despite tight containers. Most significant finding, temperature gradient inverts near original cabin site. Ground temperature increases with elevation rather than depth, reaching 57 degrees at surface level despite ambient air temperature of 34 degrees. Recommendation: area should be restricted not due to instability, but phenomena I cannot explain through any known geological process." The region was mainly unaltered during the 1,920 seconds and 1,930 seconds. Hunters who ventured too near the hollow occasionally described being confused by things like timepieces that ran backward, compasses that pointed in locations that were impossible, and, most frequently, the unnerving feeling that something was following them just out of sight. Wesley Harmon, a trapper who had hunted the area since he was a young lad, was lost for 3 days in the woods close to the hollow in 1931. He was exposed and very dehydrated when he was eventually located. The most unsettling part of his story, which was documented by Dr. James Lewis at the Cumberland Gap Medical Center, was his repeated claims that he had seen the hollow cabin intact and with smoke rising from its chimney, despite the fact that it had allegedly burned down 10 years prior. He also described trees that moved when not watched directly, and ground that rearranged itself overnight, erasing any trail markers. Margaret Fowler, a historian at the University of Kentucky, started studying the industrial growth of Harlan County mining villages in 1944. Inspired by the gaps in local archives, she started looking into the Hollow brothers in particular. Her work took her to Cumberland Gap, where she found what she wrote in her notes was a wall of silence regarding certain historical events. According to her diary, April 18, 1944. The reluctance of locals to discuss the hollow case borders on pathological. When pressed, elderly residents physically removed themselves from conversation. The town librarian claims all records from 1903 were destroyed in a flood, though no such flood is documented. Most telling was my conversation with Mr. Henry Crawford, son of the former deputy, who said only, "Some stories don't belong in books, Miss Fowler. Some were buried for good reason." Fowler continued to search for former Cumberland Gap residents who had left. She started putting the pieces of the tale together through these conversations, such as the presence of the sealed deputy's report and Dr. Forrester's journal. Her notes from May 1944 indicate growing worry regarding her own investigations. Strange occurrences have become frequent enough that I must acknowledge them. My room at the boarding house has been searched twice, though nothing was taken. Mail I've sent to colleagues has never arrived. Most unsettling are the recurrent dreams, always the same sequence: a circular clearing, a stone structure, symbols I cannot read but somehow understand. I wake each morning at precisely 3:17 a.m., regardless of when I retire. In her final piece of research, dated June 30th, 1944, stated, "Tomorrow I visit the old hollow site where the cabin once stood. Local resistance to this plan has been substantial. I've received everything from earnest pleas to thinly veiled threats, but I cannot complete this work without seeing the location firsthand. I've arranged for Jack Lamont to accompany me as a guide, though even he refuses to remain after sundown." Margaret Fowler's book was never finished. She took an indefinite leave of absence for health concerns, according to university documents. She supposedly relocated to Arizona in July 1944, and according to her distant relatives, she burnt all of her study papers before passing away in 1967 and refused to talk about her time in Kentucky. What transpired during Fowler's visit to the hollow location? Jack Lamont, her guide, provided the only account, documented in a sworn statement to the county sheriff. "We reached the old hollow property around noon. Nothing there but forest now. Nature reclaimed it all. Dr. Fowler took photographs, measurements, soil samples, normal scientific stuff. Everything was fine until about 2, when she found something half buried near where the cabin's foundation would have been. A metal box, badly corroded. She insisted on opening it despite my warnings. Lamont continues, "Inside was just papers, as far as I could tell, old, yellowed." She read for maybe 5 minutes, not speaking, then suddenly packed everything up and said we needed to leave immediately. Her demeanor completely changed, hands shaking, checking over her shoulder constantly. We were nearly back to town when she stopped suddenly, grabbed my arm, and said, "They're still here. They never left. The brothers are still watching." She made me swear to never return to the hollow before she'd continue walking. If it weren't for a 1,968 highway extension project, the story could have been forgotten forever. Workers discovered a metal box with what appeared to be personal belongings, including a journal belonging to the younger brother, Elijah Hollow, during the excavation near what was formerly the hollow's edge. The construction project was significantly disrupted by the finding. County Historical Society representatives collected the artifacts, but strange equipment malfunctions persisted. Electrical systems fail, diesel engines stall. Project now 14 days behind schedule. Foreman Russell Jenkins's daily log states, "After the box was discovered, excavator operator Vernon Mills refused to continue work, claiming his machine fought against him when digging in that section. 3 more workers quit without notice the same day." The Kentucky Historical Society owned the journal for a short time before it mysteriously vanished from their holdings in 1969. Thomas says, "We must not be greedy," says power requires patience. But I have seen what comes through when the conditions are right, and I cannot wait any longer. The soil holds memory, the darkness holds form, and soon we will hold everything. The archivist who first cataloged the items made a number of notes about its contents, characterizing it as largely indecipherable, written in a combination of English and what appears to be a personalized cipher. The few passages that were readable included repeated references to the transaction, the exchange, and what waits in the spaces between. Shortly thereafter, Catherine Benson, the archivist who processed the journal, quit her job. In a note to the Society's director, she wrote, "I can no longer continue this work in good conscience. The Hollow Journal is not merely a historical document, it is actively malignant." Since working with it, I've experienced cognitive disturbances, including time loss and recurring numerical fixations. Most alarmingly, I began finding pages of my own handwriting in perfect imitation of the journal's cipher, with no memory of producing them. I strongly recommend the item be secured away from public access or preferably destroyed. A number of additional artifacts from the metal box were photographed and cataloged prior to the journal's disappearance. Among these was a peculiarly modified pocket watch with extra hands and markings that seemed to follow the motions of the stars instead of the passage of time. The same symbols discovered in the hollow excavation were carved on a set of surveyor's tools. Only one of the 13 fabric pouches with soil samples was marked Final Repository, 13 of 13, a daguerreotype shot of 2 men who seemed to be the same, posing side by side but with slightly different facial features. A surprising discovery was made in 1972 during a speleological investigation of the Black Mountain region, a vast network of caverns that ran exactly beneath the location of the hollow cabin. The cave's peculiar characteristics defied accepted geology. Portions of their walls were absolutely smooth. Their temperature remained constant at 57 degrees regardless of depth. And most importantly, they were rich in rare earth minerals that are uncommon in Kentucky limestone formations. The survey's chief investigator, Dr. Lawrence Hodge, only wrote 1 paper about the finding before giving up. In the field notes he obtained through a Freedom of Information request from 2010, he wrote, "The cave system appears artificial in sections, yet shows no tool marks or evidence of blasting. Certain chambers have perfect acoustic properties. A whisper at one end can be clearly heard 100 feet away. Most disturbing is the central chamber where all our electronic equipment failed simultaneously, and team members reported intense disorientation and temporary memory loss. The local guide refused to enter this chamber, claiming it was where they called it through. The story of the Hollow Brothers has come up again and again in the years that have passed. A folklore student conducted interviews with elderly Harlan County residents in 1982, documenting their stories about the Hollow Men and those who called themselves brothers. These accounts frequently ran counter to official records, implying that the brothers had been in the area since the 1870 seconds without showing signs of aging, and that they had arrived much earlier than 1897. According to some, the brothers weren't even related. Rather, they were two different people. According to a 93-year-old former miner, they weren't born, they were called. Someone wished for help in those mines, made a bargain they didn't understand, and what came wasn't human. Not really. It just wore humanity, like ill-fitting clothes. In 1983, just months before she passed away at the age of 97, Edith Blackwood, the last living member of the family that had originally owned the land on which the Hollow Brothers had constructed their home, did an interview with the Appalachian Oral History Project. Her account adds a disturbing element to the narrative. "My grandfather told me things he wouldn't tell the authorities. Said before they sold that land, they found things on it that weren't right. A circle of stones that rearranged themselves overnight. A spring that ran clear during the day but black as ink under moonlight. And once, a man who came to the door asking for shelter during a storm. A man whose footprints in the mud showed no toes, only smooth ovals like a doll's feet." She went on. "Grandfather said when the Hollow Men came to buy the land, he recognized the taller one. Swore it was the same strange visitor from 30 years earlier, unchanged, didn't age a day. He sold the land cheap, just to be rid of the connection to it. Said some places aren't meant to be lived on, just lived under." When historical researchers analyzed the original sale documents in 1987, they found an interesting clause that was not common in real estate transactions of that time. The undersigned seller acknowledges that this transfer includes all mineral, subterranean, and atmospheric rights in perpetuity and forfeits any claim to discoveries or manifestations arising from the property, regardless of their nature or value. No other land transaction in Harlan County during that time period contained this exact language. The whole was mainly undiscovered throughout the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds. Despite being close to hiking routes, park rangers unofficially labeled the region a low-priority patrol zone, even after it was added to the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park in 1985. Several incidences involving confused hikers who went too close to the region are documented in internal Park Service memos that were obtained through Freedom of Information requests. Park Ranger David Martinez recorded a similar incident in 1989. Responded to report of lost hikers near Hollow Ridge Trail. Located subjects approximately 2 miles from reported location, though they claimed not to have moved. Both were severely dehydrated despite carrying adequate water supplies. Their watches had stopped at exactly 3:17, though they had been missing for approximately 7 hours. Both reported hearing mining sounds, pickaxes against stone, despite being miles from any active mining operation. The recurrent character of some of the events around the hole is possibly the most unsettling. Unusual electrical disturbances, such as power fluctuations, communication breakdowns, and unexplained equipment failures, have been observed near Cumberland Gap every November 5th since 1904. On this date, consistent electromagnetic anomalies concentrated on the former Hollow property have been identified by modern surveillance. Another oddity revealed by meteorological data is that the location receives far less rainfall than other areas, and storms frequently split and avoid the Hollow completely. For years, local farmers have seen this phenomenon, which they have called the dry shadow or the thirsty ground. According to reports, a group of college students camping close to the site in 1997 set up camp around 4 p.m., and their next vivid memory was getting back in their cars at 7 a.m. after experiencing what they called lost time. with no memory of the evening. At precisely midnight, all of their watches stopped working. The physical evidence their camping gear was discovered strewn around a half-mile radius would have prevented their account from being written off as a hoax or the product of intoxication. Some objects are stuck in nearly 30-foot-tall tree branches. More worrisome was the medical report from Cumberland Gap Regional Hospital, where all 6 students were treated for the same symptoms: dilated pupils that were insensitive to light, elevated core temperatures of exactly 101.3 degrees, and most oddly unusual activity in the same area of their brains on magnetic resonance imaging. The neurologist who examined them, Dr. Rebecca Chen, wrote in her report, "The synchronized neural activity in all 6 patients defies conventional explanation. The pattern suggests some form of external entrainment of brain waves, similar to what we might see with transcranial magnetic stimulation, but far more precise and affecting deeper brain structures. All patients report identical dreams since the incident. Dreams of descending stairs and darkness while someone calls their names from below. The students' digital and film cameras only contained corrupted files or overexposed frames instead of usable images from their expedition. But something strange was caught on audio recordings from a student's voice recorder. What musicologists determined to be a mining hymn from the 1,880 seconds that had never been professionally recorded was sung by 2 male voices in perfect harmony beneath the static and distortion. There are no exhibits or records about the Hollow Brothers at the Cumberland Gap Historical Society, which was founded in 2001. Staff personnel graciously divert attention to other facets of local history when directly questioned. Citing environmental concerns, a local rule was surreptitiously passed as recently as 2010 that forbade archaeological excavation in the unmarked region that had once been the brothers' property. A strange trend in municipal documents since 1903 that few outside academics have noticed is the methodical deletion or modification of any information about the Hollow Brothers. Books with missing pages are found in library records, particularly those that would have discussed mining history during that time. Sections of land survey maps have been rebuilt with minor modifications from previous iterations. Even headstones have been moved or changed, and cemetery sites have been reorganized. This erasing pattern is not limited to physical recordings. Even when asked explicitly about the Hollow Brothers, longtime residents show what psychologists could refer to as a collective blind spot, the inability to go into great detail about the town's mining past while utterly ignoring any reference to them. The most remarkable aspect of the local dialect isn't what residents say, but what they don't say. When conversations approach certain topics, specifically the events of late 1903 or the area now marked as watershed protection land on modern maps, speakers employ a $indace sophisticated array of linguistic diversions. They don't simply change the subject. They restructure entire narratives to circle around the omission without acknowledging it. This pattern appears in subjects ranging from age 18 to 97, suggesting an intergenerationally transmitted taboo, wrote Dr. James Wilkins, a linguistics professor who conducted field research in Cumberland Gap in 2007. As part of a study on the effects of mining, an environmental survey team from Eastern Kentucky University put seismic monitoring equipment around the area in 2012. Anomalies were detected by the station closest to the hollow. Microseismic activity that happened exactly between 3 and 4 a.m. every day at regular intervals of 17 minutes. Even though there haven't been any active mines in the area for decades, the research team defined the sound recordings from the same equipment as rhythmic impacts, consistent with mining operations, which was more worrisome. After 3 weeks, the apparatus failed entirely. Upon retrieving it, technicians found that every metal component had developed peculiar polarity patterns and had become magnetized. Dr. Andrea Morrison, the principal investigator, applied for more funds to install more advanced monitoring equipment, but her application was turned down without providing a reason. What actually became of Elijah Hollow and Thomas? Like so many others in those chaotic days of early Appalachia, they just vanished, according to the official record. However, The collective silence of a whole community points to something much more troubling, something so deeply unnerving that the unwritten agreement is still in place decades later. Some secrets are kept hidden because recalling them would be too risky, not because they are forgotten. An old guy with exposure checked himself into Pineville Medical Center during an especially severe January storm in the winter of 1965. He just identified himself as Thomas and lacked identification. According to the hospital records, the man repeatedly tried to leave his room during the night and was discovered several times standing in the hallway facing the direction of Cumberland Gap, about 20 miles away. The attending physician observed that the man looked much older than his stated age of 98 and was in a state of extreme agitation, muttering repeatedly about the other one getting loose. According to nurses, he would carry on a conversation with himself by whispering in what sounded like two different voices. The man calling himself Thomas exhibits medical anomalies I cannot explain. His body temperature remains a constant 94.6 degrees regardless of external factors. X-rays show unusual density in his skeletal structure, more consistent with mineral deposits than human bone. Most disturbing is his blood work, hemoglobin levels and cellular structures unlike anything in medical literature. If I didn't know better, I'd say he isn't entirely human. The patient passed away 3 days later. These were some of the unofficial notes made in his personal journal by Dr. Harold Jenkins, the physician who treated him. They never found a next of kin. According to the medical records, the only personal belongings he had were his clothes and a tiny canvas pouch filled with dirt. His body was buried in an unmarked grave and was never claimed. The pouch was marked Cumberland Gap, 1903. Despite being refrigerated in the morgue, the body showed unheard-of rates of decomposition, effectively disintegrating into unidentifiable organic material within hours of death. This is something that the official death certificate ignores, but that Dr. Jenkins privately observed. Additionally, the doctor said that all medical staff who had direct touch with the body later suffered from the same symptoms: vivid dreams of descending staircases, insomnia, and disorientation towards specific compass directions when sleeping. Records show that Thomas had been buried in an empty casket found by construction workers enlarging Pineville Cemetery in 1978. Only a little layer of black powder and another cloth pouch of earth were found inside the casket. County documents on the burial were later changed to reflect a different location, and this discovery was not made public. In the decades that followed, there were sporadic accounts of strange experiences in the area around Cumberland Gap. On isolated trails, hikers report encountering tall, slender guys who pose odd queries about the makeup of the soil or the depth of caverns. From abandoned tunnels, workers in the few surviving mining enterprises occasionally claim to hear two voices singing in perfect harmony. Residents most frequently report having dreams in which identical figures standing motionless at the boundaries of their property observe them. After finding mentions of the hollow case in his great-grandfather's notebook, Michael Reynolds, an archaeology student at the University of Tennessee, developed an interest in it in 2015. He performed ground-penetrating radar studies of the suspected location of the cabin in spite of villagers' warnings. After his disappearance in 2016, his emails to his faculty advisor were recovered, and they revealed something unusual. The subsurface imaging shows what appears to be a structure extending at least 300 feet below the surface, far deeper than any mining operation would have reached in the early 1900s. The formation has perfect symmetry and appears to be hollow, with walls of unusual density. Most strange is that when we compared scans taken 3 days apart, the internal dimensions had changed, as if the structure is slowly expanding. Reynolds' findings were never formally published. Near the former hollow property, his study equipment and bag were discovered in a complete circle. No more evidence of him has been found after thorough searches. Residents of Harlan County continue to claim strange occurrences around the old hollow, including watches that run backward, compasses that spin without pointing north, and the sensation of being pursued by something that is barely visible. There are still areas of the forest where hunting dogs won't go, and parents continue to caution their kids, never go into the hollow after dark, never respond if you hear someone calling your name from among the trees. And never, ever speak about the brothers who once lived there. Because some stories don't end when we stop telling them. Some are just waiting patiently for someone to speak them back into existence. Occasionally, oddities in the area are picked up by modern scientific equipment, including localized magnetic field distortions, unexplained radiation fingerprints, and what one researcher called temporal inconsistencies, in which atomic clocks momentarily desynchronize when put within specific hollow regions. Researchers sometimes give up on their studies after conducting preliminary research, and these phenomena are still mostly unreported in peer-reviewed publications. However, what is known is Cumberland Gap's peculiar population trend in the century after the Hollow brothers vanished. According to census data, Cumberland Gap has maintained an uncanny level of population despite economic hardship and the general population decline that is typical of Appalachian mining towns. Precisely 1,000 to 1,300 residents recorded in every census from 1,910 to 2010, despite migration, births, and deaths that should have changed this number. The town's abnormally high identical twin rate, which was 317% higher than the national average based on a 2008 medical research that was later withdrawn without reason, is even more concerning. Particularly throughout adolescence, local doctors have observed that these twins frequently report identical dreams and synchronized conduct. Periodically conducted aerial scans reveal evidence of activity at the Blue Diamond Mine, which was officially closed in 1957. Heat signatures that aren't consistent with an abandoned facility, especially in the vicinity of Shaft 7, which was the Hollow brothers' main workplace. Unusual light emissions from the shut openings are often captured by satellite images, especially around the anniversary of the brothers' disappearance. Another anomaly was discovered in 2019 when the area was digitally mapped. Depending on the time of day, the exact location of the Hollow cabin's former location appears differently. Satellite photographs taken during the day only depict dense woodland, but at night they sometimes show what looks to be a small structure and a clearing. The digital files that include these photographs are corrupted at exactly 3:17 a.m., experts found when they tried to reconcile these disparities. Regardless of the computer system utilized, they are processed on the same day. Some claim that if you attentively listen while standing at the edge of Cumberland Gap at sunset, you may hear distant singing ancient mining tunes in a voice that sounds like one man and two at the same time. Locals, however, are wise enough not to listen for too long. They are aware that some tunes are best not heard. They understand why the Hollow brothers are never mentioned. They recall the fate of those who do. Among Cumberland Gap's oldest families, a folktale that has been passed down in whispers but never written down endures. It describes a miner in the 1,890 seconds who, facing certain death after becoming trapped in a cave-in, struck a last-ditch deal with something that called to him out of the shadows. He prayed for salvation and assistance. The answer wasn't divine or human. Rather, it was something that had been waiting in the shadows ever since humans first stood on 2 feet. The agreement was straightforward. In return for letting him see the world above, it would save him and even help him succeed. However, it required a vessel or vessels. The miner accepted without fully comprehending the ramifications. He was rescued and came out of a collapse that should have killed him alive. However, his shadow occasionally drifted apart from his body after that day. Additionally, his mirror occasionally displayed a different visage when he believed no one was looking. The thing gradually changed, learning, adapting, and splitting until the original miner eventually disappeared entirely. 2 brothers who were nearly but not quite alike in appearance took his position. The brothers bought land above the location where the deal was made, a pair of brothers who started getting ready for something far bigger than themselves. Maybe this is just a narrative to explain something that cannot be explained. Maybe something is still waiting, watching, and remembering the taste of surface air and human form somewhere in the darkness beneath Cumberland Gap. This monster is aware of patience because it measures time in millennia rather than moments. The whole is there, regardless of the reality. A realm where things that should be solid periodically change, where reality looks thinner, and where the line separating one world from another occasionally trembles. And at Cumberland Gap, when the wind comes from Black Mountain's direction, when kids have a bad dream about going downstairs, and when the clocks hesitate for a moment at 3:17. The elderly families recall silently. They recall the time they were saved by quiet. They recall the Hollow Brothers' curse,